It is hard to believe that Bobby Fischer was only 13 years old when this game was played. A year before this game, he was rated 1726. But 2 years after this game, he was the United States chess champion. His opponent is Attilio di Camillo, or Camillo. I'm not really sure how to pronounce the last name. Don't know much about him, but although I have read that he might have been one of the mentors of Bobby Fischer. But this game was played in Washington, D.C. at the Eastern States Championship in 1956. Let us jump right in. Fischer has the white pieces. He begins with e4, and we can already see the outline of his play. Even at that young age, he played the Spanish a6, bishop a4, all normal moves, d6, c3. And here, black departs from the standard play. He plays bishop to g4, pinning the knight at f3, but this move is premature, and Fischer is going to show why. H3 is played, bishop h5, and watch how Fischer actually plays against this bishop. Now, in this position, it would be a mistake for Bobby Fischer to play d4, because that would justify this move by pinning the knight that defends the center pawn. What Fischer does instead is play d3, sort of set up this wall on these light squares, and he doesn't have to worry about defending a pawn on d4, yet he has already opened up the classic maneuver, rook to e1, knight d2, f1, g3. So he's in good shape. Bishop to e7, knight b to d2, and now black castles, and this gives Bobby Fischer a target for his attack, although castling really is the best move probably for black anyway. He continues his plan, rook to e1, over defending e4, the knight can go to f1, queen to d7, knight to f1, and now knight to a5, the standard idea for black, harassing this bishop, which is really a better minor piece here than the knight is. So to protect that bishop, Fischer tucks it back at c2. And now black plays h6. And what this move h6 does is it gives Fischer a hook to attack on the king side. And because of this move, he doesn't just play the knight to g3 here. He plays g4, gaining space with the pawns, and then planning to play knight to g3 for a much more aggressive formation. And he might be able to play g5 here and use this h6 pawn as a hook. It would be a mistake, by the way, for black to sacrifice here. Play this standard sacrificial idea of knight takes g4, pawn takes knight, queen takes g4 check. It looks great for black. He's hitting the king, and he's attacking the knight on f3, but Fischer would block the check with a knight to g3, and after queen takes knight, he would take the bishop at h5 with his knight, and that wins a piece, because the queen at d1 actually defends the knight sort of through the black queen. So the pawn at g4 cannot be taken. Black retreats his bishop to g6. Now the knight goes to g3, aiming at that f5 outpost. Knight to h7, perhaps wanting to trade off some minor pieces on the g5 square. Fischer jumps in with knight to f5. That's always the sort of the strongest square for a knight in these e4, e5 structures. And here, black plays knight to b7, looking for a better square for that knight, but that knight never finds happiness in this game. Perhaps he wants to aim at the c5 square, but this is when Fischer takes the opportunity now. There's no pin on the knight at f3. He plays d4, gets the pawns in the center at d4 and e4, and of course denies the black knight access to the c5 square. Black takes on d4, white recaptures. And here, probably best for black is rook a to e8. But Fischer, Attilio plays knight to d8. Maybe he's aiming to bring the knight in at e6. Fischer takes the bishop on e7 with check, queen takes, and then he plays d5. Notice him playing against this knight on d8, taking away e6 and c6, so it has no good squares to go to. Now the knight on d8 is interfering with these two rooks. Not a very good scenario for black. Black plays c5, and Fischer does not take en passant. That would be a mistake, because then after knight takes c6, black's problems are solved with his knight. So instead he plays the bishop to f4, aiming at d6 and maybe threatening to play e5 at some point, breaking in the center. The knight plays to b7, and that knight just stays very passive, defending the d6 pawn. The bishop tucks back to g3. Rook f to e8, aiming at the e4 pawn. Fischer doesn't defend it just yet, but he plays queen a4, excuse me, with threats of creating a weakness and opening up the a file on the queen side. Black plays queen to f6. He's aiming at b2, and maybe he wants to play this knight to g5 to put some pressure on the knight at f3. First, Fischer takes on b5, black recaptures, then he plays king to g2. And what this does is it frees the queen. Now that the king is defending the knight, the queen doesn't have to defend it, and it can become active. Knight to g5, hitting f3 twice, so knight takes knight, pawn takes knight. So black has some dark square control with the d6 and g5 pawns and the queen at f6. However, white is definitely better here. Not only does he have the bishop pair, but Fischer also has a nice space advantage and much better minor pieces. This knight on b7 is not very good. So Fischer has the edge. He takes on a8, rook takes a8, and now plays his key idea. This is almost like a Benoni formation, and in these structures, white wants to play this move, e5. And this is going to create a passed d-pawn. Bishop takes c2. If he takes on e5, then bishop takes bishop, and he just gets a similar structure. Black takes on c2 first, which hits the queen, so Fischer has to take back. Pawn takes, and bishop takes e5, gaining a tempo against the queen. Black plays to d8. So we see so much of this position is going to revolve around this d-pawn. That's the heart of white's position. He wants to advance it. Black wants to stop it. But Fischer's in better position at the moment to stop it. He plays d6. Now, black could capture that pawn. And it's a little tricky. If Fischer pins the knight with rook to d1, then black can defend with rook to a6, and queen to c5 looks like it's just winning for white, but actually, if Fischer were to do this after queen to a8 check, hitting the king at g2, black is equalized in this position, so he has to be a little careful. Instead of queen to c5, just king to g1, stepping out of that potential check. If the queen moves to avoid the pin, queen c5, and white is better with pressure on this knight. The b5 pawn looks like it's going to fall here. So to avoid that, black plays after d6. He does not take the pawn, but instead plays c4. The idea is to get the knight active to c5, where it can come back to d7 and perhaps blockade, but also could hop into a stronger d3 square. Queen to e4 hits the knight. Knight to c5 hits the queen. And now queen to c6 both hits the knight at c5 and the pawn at b5. Here, the best move for black was probably rook to c8. Because here it would be a mistake for white to take on b5. After knight to d3, black equalizes. He's hitting the bishop and the rook, and if rook to e3, then rook to c5 would actually be a winning position for black because it's a double attack against the queen and the bishop. So instead of rook to e3, rook to a1 would keep an equal position after, and then rook to c5 would be a mistake here because queen to b7 threatening rook to a8, pinning the queen against the king. But black does not do that. He plays knight to d3. Maybe he thought he could get that same position in a different move order, but it doesn't work out. The rook goes to e3 here. Now rook to c8. And if Fischer takes the pawn at b5, it's that line we just saw, rook to c5, and black would be winning. But instead, he avoids that and plays queen to b7. The rook goes to b8 to hit the queen. The queen comes back to d5. Knight b4 hits the queen. Queen c5, knight d3, and queen to d4. And now Fischer's pieces are arranged almost perfectly to escort the d-pawn up the board. Here, the best move for black is probably queen to d7, but when you're blockading a pawn on the 6th rank with your queen, you know you're in some trouble. He played rook to b6. Fischer goes ahead, advances the pawn, and here we kind of sort of see a glimpse of Fischer's future genius. When he played this d7 move, I'm pretty sure he had an idea in mind. Rook to b7, it looks like the pawn is going to fall. But it is not. And here Fischer unleashed a brilliant shot. He plays the move bishop to c7, and that's it, folks. There's nothing he, first of all, he's attacking the queen, right? So black has to contend with this. He can't ignore it. Um, if he takes with the queen, then white just promotes, right? It's the queen. If he takes with the rook, then rook to e8 check, hitting the queen and the king, and that's the game there. So black played one more move, knight to f4 check. Fischer played king to f1, and now there are no checks. And because of the tactic we just looked at, which is unavoidable, Fischer resigned. Oh, excuse me, his opponent, Fischer won. Fischer's opponent resigned, and we got a glimpse into the future genius of the great Bobby Fischer. I hope you've enjoyed this game, this view of Fischer as a young chess player. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.